So first thing to say is thank you. Thank you for choosing to come to this event. Thank you to Britannic for inviting us. And hopefully in the next 30 minutes, we'll give you some value and some insights in terms of where customer experience is heading and the role of contact centres within that. I think you've all been given a feedback form, and I'm sort of told that if you fill it in and say I'm amazing, you're all going to get a £100 John Lewis voucher at the end of the talk, or at least one of you will. Okay, so as we get into this, we'll just set a little bit of context. Consumer behaviour is changing enormously. So you heard from both of the presentations this morning, from Taz's presentation, also from Johan's presentation, that there's a lot of movement towards digitisation. And when we sit in a technical conference like this, we're thinking about it from a customer experience point of view, but if you think about your own life, there's been a big shift. If you think about, if you've got enough grey hair as I have, you probably remember saving up your pocket money and then getting on a bus and going to a shop called Woolworths and buying a record once a week, and that was a massive highlight. Whereas for kids now, everything is real time, everything is instantaneous, and everything is streamed. And people seem perfectly happy with the concept. They don't actually own that physical record or piece of media anymore. You have a license to listen to it, but you don't actually own it. So this ease of use and the trade-off between subscription and physical, digital and virtual worlds is really getting some traction. And I'm pretty sure when you think about this Christmas coming, there's going to be an awful lot more of these things sat around your house, my house, other people's houses. And the interplay between man and machine, voice-based interaction, and getting slightly more intelligent responses back from the machine is evolving enormously. And if we think about Internet of Things, a fancy way of saying, you know, machines talking to machines or machines talking to humans. But actually, again, most of you probably, looking at the average age group in the room, most of you probably remember a fax machine and that garbled kind of interchange or a 56K modem brokering an agreement between another computer to computer. So the concept's actually not particularly new. What is different is the power of the computing behind it. So Moore's law, it's doubling every 2 to 3 years. The ability for machines to do more and more sophisticated things has moved on enormously. If you think about yourself and the amount of things that you're running through your phone, most of us have got something like 30 apps on our phone now and are using something like 9 or 10 of them every day. So a huge amount of your life is running through there. One of the really important points when we think about customer service is what's going on with all that information. So there's a huge amount of what we would call digital DNA. You're leaving a fingerprint every day. So every one of the apps that's on your phone right now know that you're sat in this room, because when you downloaded it, you probably did what I do and just click next and install it as quick as you can. But you enabled location-based services. So all of those apps know where in the world you are right now, which is quite useful for some organisations. And that all feeds into this narrative of the robots are coming. And everyone's jumped on the bandwagon. So we get to the Labour conference and even Jeremy Corbyn's there jumping on the bandwagon. We need to tax robots, robots are the evil. And it all sounds a little bit like Luddites and the Industrial Revolution coming again. And there's a lot of noise and a lot of froth. Bill Gates has kind of talked about how are we going to tax robots. The reality is most westernised societies right now are based on a dynamic of you do a job, pay as you earn tax, and that funds roads, hospitals, schools, and all the rest of it. What you do as more and more stuff moves towards automation. What's the framework within which you create that tax revenue? But if you cut through the noise, there's probably, over the next decade, maybe something like 9–10% of jobs get automated, which for some people will sound a scary thing. But then do you remember a time when you used to have to queue in a bank to get your own cash out? Do you remember a time when you walked into the airport and kicked your bag along a highly shiny floor for 20 minutes to then have somebody type what seemed to be about 1,000 keys on a keyboard to ultimately give you a ticket to get on a plane? How many people here have checked in themselves on a plane? Just quick show of hands over the last year. How many of you did that using the app with a QR code? Keep your hand in there if you did it with a QR code. So there's a concept of that job's gone, you're pretty happy because it's effortless, easy customer service, the airline's pretty happy, and the chances are that person's not really lost their job, they've got redeployed to do something else a little bit more useful, to play into a higher skill set. Back on the airline analogy, think about how the world's going to evolve over the next 10 years. Which person out of this equation do you think is going to lose their job in the next 10 or 15 years, the pilot or the cabin crew? Quick show of hands, pilot. Quick show of hands, cabin crew. You're all quite clever, it's the pilot. But when you think about it, the pilot is operating within highly defined parameters, following, and they're trained to do that, and by law almost they have to do that, follow the set protocols of what to do. If you think about what the cabin crew have to deal with every day, whilst there's sort of lots of the same problems, every person they deal with is different, and there's a lot of problems that are kind of unscripted. And then you're back to relying on your human skills, emotion intelligence, which is the bit that we all know computers aren't great. So it's one of those really interesting things when you look at that. And then you think about where we are today, where you're typing into a chat window, waiting for a delayed response of about 15 seconds for someone who's sort of, did you mean this? No, I didn't mean that, but I'll type it again and hopefully you'll get it this time. So you can see a glimpse into the future as this Moore's law plays out of computer power gets stronger and stronger, faster and faster. The ability for automation to take a stronger and stronger role continues to grow. And the flip side of this is, if you look back over the last decade, it's pretty much, it's a decade since the banking crisis really first hit. It was around about this time in 2007 that Lehman Brothers went down. I think it was end of September. They went down the tube, and that was the start of the banking crisis. But it was also the start or a pivotal point in the loss of trust between consumers and organisation. There's now very little trust, and more importantly, very little loyalty. So consumers will vote and walk with their feet, as well as tweeting and telling everyone else about how bad you are. AKA, there's a nice cue for a Ryanair story. So it's really important to get it right. And the reality is, when you look in most westernized worlds right now, there's only 4 ways to differentiate. You can differentiate on price, a bit like Ryanair. You can differentiate on product and innovation, maybe Apple with the iPhone X. You can differentiate on service and quality. When you look at most organizations, they're not Apple. You're not going to be innovating the next iPhone X. Most people have already got their business up and running, and in that framework it's quite hard to compete purely on price because you have an incumbent cost base in place. So customer service, quality, creating the right experience and keeping those loyal customers is pretty key for most people, and I think that came out in the earlier presentations you saw as well. Another thing that's interesting when we think about what do customers want, Harvard Business Review did a study to look at what exceptional service, what that created for an organisation if you were able to offer exceptional service. And the reality is, when customers received exceptional service compared to really good service, the difference for the business was nearly negligible gain in terms of loyalty, in terms of profitability. So customers aren't looking necessarily for exceptional service. It sounds like a great phrase to say we offer exceptional service, but you probably don't need to. There's a real cost associated in doing that. What they want is good, solid, consistent service, but more importantly, good, solid, consistent service across all the board of the channels. So Yoann talked this morning about 9 channels possibly growing to 11 over the next couple of years. You can't have a brilliant service on the web and then a dreadful service when you have to pick up the phone. We're probably back to a Ryanair story somewhere there. We talked about customer effort. So customers, if you think about yourself, people are becoming dysfunctionally impatient. So most people will get interrupted during the course of their working day 56 times. Most people are working on things for no longer than 3 minutes before they're interrupted. So subconsciously, as life goes on and years of this, people are becoming what might be described as dysfunctionally impatient. They want things exceptionally quickly, and they want it with the least amount of effort. So, what are the key drivers? And as technology companies, We love to measure the stuff that's got numbers. So Taz talked earlier today about, emotion. When you push more and more of your customer service through automation, if you think about yourself, when was the last time you phoned Amazon? They have engineered out of the customer service the need for you to phone them because they've thought about the customer journey, the process, they've thought about what's likely to happen, and they've automated it, refined it, and smoothed it out. And that's the great news. But the big question is, how do you feel? Which is exactly what Taz was talking about. What's the emotion? What do you feel towards that brand? Do you feel loyalty towards them? Do you want to spend more money with them? Would you come back there? Would you recommend them? And the question is, how do you measure that? How do you measure that when you're dealing with an avatar, a robot, an automated process? We can measure how quickly you got through the process. We can measure the outcome, but we can't tell how you've got there. And it's really important when you start to make this shift to a digital organization that you factor in at the very top level of the business that the KPIs that cascade down through your organization feed that in. How do people feel about our organization? How do they feel about our brand? Would they do business with it? Particularly when you have people's pay or remuneration aligned around KPIs, because you can quite often have a big disconnect between shifting to a digital world and an old world and how people behave within it. And candidly, the biggest blocker to this shift is people, employees, inertia, politics, culture, all of those kind of things. So as we think about automation, think about your Amazon story. Loads of stuff is going through straight through process. It's all going seamlessly. It's all running automated. Things go really, really nicely, really well, very cost effective. But then what? Then what happens when something falls through the crack? It falls out of the process, something unusual. By definition, if more and more stuff is going to go through an automated process, the stuff that's left is going to be awkward, ugly, and complex to deal with. Because the customer, before they picked up the phone to speak to you, has tried to fix it themselves. They've gone onto the forums, they've gone onto YouTube. They've tried, the last resort for a lot of people is to pick up the phone. So by the time that call's coming into you, it's going to be complex. So now think about the people that you have answering the phone, dealing with those queries. Are they best equipped to deal with that problem? And the chances are they're not. And so when we think about the concept of like networked individuals, you're going to see different types of roles appearing. You're going to have somebody, if you'd had a real big problem, say you went on a cruise around the world and you got food poisoning, we're into some kind of negotiation now around compensation. So you need somebody who's pretty good at negotiation. You may need somebody who's quite technical to solve specific technical problems or knows the right people in the organization to solve the technical problems. You may need the troubleshooter. So all of the kind of tools and people that you need to solve it are going to change. So the roles within the organization start to change. And when you think about that complex problem, you spent 10,000 on a cruise and it kind of went wrong and now you're dealing with the company to fix it. It's a collaborative process in terms of getting you to the resolution you want. And when we think about Microsoft and when we think about the tools that they're bringing to market with Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, allied to all of the other technology, it's by no accident that that graph looks like that. Ian's here, he's at the back of the room, he's doing a slot later, so I don't need to necessarily bang the drum for Microsoft, but there's a definite correlation between the way the world is moving to having to solve these more and more complex problems and the environment within which and the tools within which Microsoft is providing organizations to solve them. So when we think about handling an interaction, if we broke it down into its simplest components, there's really only 4 stages. You receive the interaction. Somebody sends you an email, they pick up the phone, it comes into your organization. In exactly the same way when you walk into an A&E department, you walk in, then somebody has to triage it and figure out who are you, what's the problem, how are we best going to deal with that, and then route you on to your end point. Then we get to a resolution phase. How do we resolve that? Are you just looking to look up the balance on your bank account? You can get pushed down a self-service route. Have you got a real problem that's a legal issue? We probably need to speak to a human, and we need to speak to one of those networked individuals. So all of that decisioning is going on. And then the final stage is the report, the wrap up, and the refinement of the process to continuously improve it. And when we look at organizations like Amazon, they are continuously improving those processes and adapting them. So when we start to think about AI, automation, all of these words that you hear, it's very easy to end up in an overwhelmed state where it feels like you need to go out and buy the next NASA spaceship in order to do customer service. And actually, when you grind it down to the basics of what most organizations need, most organizations already have 85, 90% of the technology to do what they need to do. It's already there, they've already bought it, they've already paid for it, they're just not using it properly. And here's a case study of Ringo. So most of you have probably parked in a UK town centre at some point and had about £25 in various ages and stages of pound coins on you in order to pay for the parking. So you're using a pay-as-you-go Ringo app. And the incredible thing with this organisation, over 98% of the interactions are just passing straight through a straightforward phone-based IVR or a mobile app. So the technology behind it is not rocket science. It's not the world's most sophisticated technology, but from a customer service point of view, it's pretty robust and it delivers what people want, which is self-service. And it's pretty cost effective. We think about Helly Hansen. Helly Hansen is a global brand. They're a customer of Enghouse. And when your perception of that organization is that they're this wide and they've got thousands of people and hundreds of shops, the reality is these people sell through a network of 60 distributors, so they have 60 customers worldwide. So those 60 people are really, really important to them. So when something goes wrong, you're back to that group of networked individuals. They need to know who in the organization is available and aligned to this customer and who has the skills and the access to all their information to solve this problem right here, right now. And so that's where Microsoft Skype, UC, all of those things come into play, integrated with the Dynamics CRM as well. Another one, Home Group. You can't have failed to have noticed, in the news, the debacle that is universal credit. So if there was ever a way of doing something kind of badly, this would be a pretty good case study of it, not Home Group, but the universal credit. So Home Group as an organisation, as someone who, their world's got turned upside down. So they are a social housing organisation, very, very big. They have thousands and thousands of social housing. And when you wound the clock back 3 or 4 years ago, it was quite a nice little business because they used to get a cheque from the council every month for each tenant, and that paid the mortgage on the property and everyone was happy. Now the tenant gets universal credit, one big lump of money. And the way these guys would describe it is you're giving somebody a big lump of money at the start or the end of a month, and that person walks down the street and they walk past the off license, the betting shop, the supermarket, the friend they owe money, and right at the very end of that street is us, the people that provide a roof over their head, and we have to try and collect that money off of them. So their business models got turned upside down, and they now have to be a huge amount more proactive about collecting rent, reminding people that they have rent to pay, giving people options if they can't pay the full amount now, all of that. So their business model has changed. And so this is really about sort of more of an outbound technology solution of using the customer insight, the customer CRM, allied with outbound dialing, texting, emailing, as well as a customer portal to reduce their cost of business and try and keep that rent coming in. Another one, Zinc Group. So this organisation works in probably one of the most heavily regulated sort of markets there is, which is it's in financial services and it's in debt collection within financial services. And they use our real-time speech analytics technology, which is listening into the phone call. It listens to what, in real time, listens to what the customer is saying, listens to what the company is saying. And there's certain phrases. So if I said to you, your home will be at risk if you do not keep up repayments, if you've sort of seen that phrase on adverts, what I just said would have invalidated the contract because I said your home will be rather than your home may be. the use of just that one word, will or may, has invalidated the contract. So it's really, really important when you deal in these kind of environments that the right language and phrases are used. The technology has the ability to listen to what's being said. It knows what the regulatory phrases are, and if it's said wrong, it will correct the agent there and then to say, you said it wrong, say it again in the right way, otherwise the contract's void. It listens to all of the stuff Johan talked about in terms of sentiment, who's getting stressed, who's over-talking, is someone using swear words or bad language. Can also be used in a sales situation. So if you have a salesperson that's a super seller, you can start to see what phrases do they use when, what's the speak ratio, how much speaking do they do compared to the customer. So you can learn an awful lot, again, by using effectively some form of AI in the background. Now the reality is we see a lot of people starting to move from legacy PBX to soft PBX, unified communications, Microsoft Skype. Landmark Group, if any of you have ever, most of you have probably never heard of Landmark Group, but most of you have probably heard of Daily Mail and the Daily Mail Group. So the Daily Mail Group own Landmark, and Landmark are the company that if you've ever bought a house in this country, 98% of house purchases, that pack that comes with all the local searches and all of that is done by these guys. So they have multiple different brand names, but it's ultimately flows back to this company. And they're a classic situation where they've grown through acquisition, multiple sites, multiple PBXs, one or two of every different flavor of everything, and they're starting to transition towards the Microsoft world. And that needs to be done in a controlled way. So what we tend to typically see in these type of organizations, they'll start using Skype internally for their own office communication, employee to employee. They'll use it for IM. Over time, they'll roll it out to one site and get one site up and running. And then over time, maybe as contracts sweat down on existing legacy investments, software PBXs, they'll then start rolling it out. So they get a controlled migration, de-risks it for everyone, learn from each time they roll it out, and extract the best benefit out of the existing agreements and contracts they have in place. So in terms of top 5 tips, if you like, things that if I was to kind of leave you with, I would say really, really think about what your value proposition is. And it sounds really, really obvious. So people say, okay, what's your USP? But Taz talked about this earlier of, I forget the 3-letter acronym, but it was true but useless. So when you actually ask people and ask yourself this, what does your company do? Why would I buy from you rather than someone else? Actually, most people really struggle to articulate that. And until you can answer that, or the people at the top of an organization can answer that, you've probably got a little bit of a problem. And back to that paradigm of price, product, innovation, service, where does it fit? If you're a Ryanair, it's okay to be kind of on the not so great customer service spectrum, potentially, because the primary motivator for people coming to you is price. Bizarrely, their sales and bookings went up on the back of the current flight cancellation crisis because people thought they're desperate and I'll get an even cheaper price. So understand that. Understand what matters to your customers and understand what they want. And it does differ. So for some people, it is that ease of use and effortless customer service. Some people want to be recognized and known as important, but understand what matters to them. I'm pretty sure sort of effort and time will be well up there. Think about building a digital by design approach and not a digital by default approach. So one of the biggest pitfalls people step into when they do start to make this journey is as you shift towards automation, AI, robotization, call it what you will, it saves you a lot of money because the more stuff like the Amazon, the more stuff that's going straight through is very, very cheap compared to a human dealing with it. But the mistake is the crack in the road. When things go wrong, then what? And at that point, you've got an awkward, ugly, complex problem. You're going to need somebody probably on a higher pay grade in the middle or back office of your organization to deal with it. And you need to invest in that and accept that, because if you don't, you're going to be back at that slide of 86% of people just walking because you didn't solve their problem, you didn't treat them right. So make contingency, don't just pocket all of the saving, as tempting as it might be. Integrate and automate. It's a real obvious one, but you will be amazed at the amount of organisations that we will go into that haven't properly integrated their CRM system with their customer interaction management system, contact centre. Real basic stuff. So when we talked about that digital DNA, that digital fingerprint, there's a huge amount of information available to you. If some Californian company that's got an app knows that you're sat in this room right now, there's a pretty good chance that you know more about the customers that you're dealing with than you think. And if you're asking a customer to give you information you've already got, then you need to stop and think about your processes. And then, one of the final ones is really be collaborative. The biggest blocker in all of this is not the technology. Integrating technology, it's not that difficult. Most of the technology that you need to do this stuff pretty well is out there. The real problem is people and inertia and culture. And part of that is if you look at most organisations, they're structured in vertical silos: sales, marketing, finance, HR. You look at a customer journey, it runs horizontally. The customer doesn't care which department it is, they're just trying to get from A to B like that. So breaking down those silos is pretty important, and you need to, as you start to design this strategy, you need to bring your organisation and people in and get that right buy-in. Otherwise, they will just build walls and block it all the way along. And do things iteratively. This is not a big bang. It doesn't all need to get done in one day. Think about the key journeys and processes that your customers take and automate and smooth them out and optimize them as much as you can first. So just to wrap up, we do work closely with Microsoft. We are a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We do co-engineering with them out of their Redmond offices in the States. We are also, incidentally, the same with Avaya and Cisco, and one of the biggest strengths probably of the Enghouse interaction platform is the fact that we will sit in an environment across multiple PBXs simultaneously and give people the option to migrate from one to the other, which is something people find quite useful. And that brings us to the end, and I'll leave you with a quote from Tina. Some of you might know Tina, who works at the Reading UK Microsoft office. I'll be at the back of the room. We're here sort of all day. If you've got kind of any questions or you want to know more about how we do some of this stuff with some of these customers, please do feel free to come see me. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.